History isn't just a story about the past, it's the voice of humanity echoing through time. Welcome to Time Trackers, where every episode takes you across centuries, from the rise of forgotten empires to the fall of mighty kings. Here, you don't just listen to history, you live it. Through real stories, authentic English narration, and the timeless lessons hidden in the past, you'll sharpen your listening skills, grow your vocabulary, and master English naturally through the power of storytelling. So tune in, follow the timeline, and let history become your greatest English teacher. This is Time Trackers, where language meets legacy. If you love learning English through history, don't forget to subscribe and let time tell its stories with us. Chapter 1. The Wanderer. In the 5th century BC, a curious Greek man set out to see the known world. He was not a warrior or a ruler, but something rarer in his age, a storyteller. For 8 years, he journeyed across the ancient world, from the sun-baked temples of Egypt to the marble cities of Greece, through the lands of Persia, Babylon, Ethiopia, India, Arabia, Scythia, and Libya. His name was Herodotus, and through his eyes, humanity would one day see its own beginnings. His adventures began in ancient Egypt, where he gazed at the towering pyramids of Giza and listened to the priests who spoke of their construction stories that echoed through millennia. When he returned home, Herodotus gathered his tales, questions, and insights into a single monumental work, The Histories, one of mankind's earliest and greatest literary achievements. When he presented it to the Athenian assembly, its brilliance was instantly recognized, and the city rewarded him with 250 kilograms of gold. But long before he became the father of history, Herodotus was just a curious boy born in Halicarnassus in 484 BC under Persian rule. He was born into a wealthy, educated family, a life of comfort and security had he wished for it. Yet Greece was at war. When he was only 5, the Greeks triumphed over the Persians at the Battle of Plataea, and young Herodotus began to ask the question that would shape his life. Why did Greeks and non-Greeks fight at all? He knew the answer could not be found by staying home. So, he left Halicarnassus and set out into the world, first to Susa, then to Babylon, and beyond. Chapter 2. The Roots of Conflict. In Susa, the Persian winter capital, Herodotus asked the Persians about the origins of their enmity with the Greeks. They told him it all began long before the Trojan War, with the Phoenicians. According to them, Phoenician traders once came to Argos, a Greek city, and kidnapped Io, the daughter of the local king, taking her to Egypt. The Greeks later retaliated by sailing to Phoenicia and abducting Europa, the Phoenician king's daughter. For a moment, the scales were balanced until Greek sailors struck again, seizing Medea, daughter of the king of Colchis. When her father demanded her return, the Greeks refused, citing Io's earlier abduction. Thus, said the Persians, the score stood 2-1 in favor of Greece. But vengeance always finds a way. A generation later, Paris, son of Priam, abducted Helen of Sparta. When the Greeks demanded her return, Paris reminded them of Medea. The Greeks' fury led to the Trojan War, which destroyed Troy and deepened the hatred between East and West. This, said the Persians, is why we see the Greeks as enemies. This was the beginning of the war. Most historians might have stopped there, but not Herodotus. He always asked why, again and again. He discovered that the Phoenicians told a different story. According to them, Io had not been kidnapped at all. She had fallen in love with a Phoenician captain, become pregnant, and fled willingly to avoid shame. Yet Herodotus was not convinced either. He sought another origin, one closer to his own time. Chapter 3. The Lydian Kings. Herodotus proposed that the first real attack on Greek freedom came not from myth, but from Croesus, the last king of the Myrmnad dynasty of Lydia, who ruled from 585 BC to 546 BC. Before Croesus, another line of kings, the Heraclids, had ruled Lydia. The last of them, Candaus, would lose both his throne and his life through a fatal act of vanity. Candaus adored his wife and often praised her beauty to his trusted guard, Gyges. One night, the king insisted Gyges see the queen naked to prove her perfection. Gyges refused, calling it shameful, but a king's command was law. So, hidden behind a door, he watched. But the queen saw him as he slipped away. The next morning she summoned Gyges and gave him a dreadful choice. Kill Candaus and claim both the throne and her hand, or die immediately for the insult. Trapped between death and betrayal, Gyges chose life and became king. Thus ended the Heraclid dynasty, and the Myrmnads began. Yet the Oracle of Delphi warned that vengeance would fall on Gyges' fourth descendant and prophecy would not fail. Chapter 4. The Rise of Croesus. After Gyges came Artis, then Sidiotis, and finally Aliatis, who built the foundations of Lydia's great empire. His son, Croesus, inherited immense wealth and ambition. At the height of his power, Croesus was said to be the richest man on earth. From his capital at Sardis, he conquered the Ionian and Aeolian Greek cities along the coast, making them pay tribute. He even prepared ships to invade the Aegean islands, but eventually turned to diplomacy instead. Trade and tribute flowed into Sardis until it became the epicenter of the ancient world's wealth. Yet Croesus was not content with riches alone. He longed to know whether wealth brought happiness. Chapter 5. The Wisdom of Solon. Among the many wise Greeks who visited Sardis was Solon, the famed lawgiver of Athens. He had written laws for his city and wisely included a 10-year clause preventing any changes, a plan that allowed him to travel freely for a decade. During one of Croesus's lavish banquets, the king asked Solon, "Tell me, who is the happiest of all men?" Croesus expected to hear his own name. Instead, Solon answered, "Tellus of Athens." The king, surprised but intrigued, asked why. Solon explained, "Tellus lived in a prosperous city, saw his sons and grandchildren thrive, and died gloriously in battle defending Athens. He was honored with a public funeral where he fell." Croesus accepted the answer, though disappointed. Then he asked, "Who is the second happiest man?" Solon replied again with unexpected names, Cleobis and Biton, twin brothers from Argos. He told their story. During a festival for the goddess Hera, their mother's oxen were missing. So the brothers yoked themselves to the cart and pulled it 4 miles to the temple. The people praised them, and their mother prayed that the goddess grant them the greatest blessing possible for mortal men. That very night, the twins fell into a peaceful sleep and never woke. Their statues were raised in their honor. Croesus grew impatient with Solon's answers, certain the sage mocked him. But Solon replied calmly, "No man can be called happy until his life is complete. You, my king, are wealthy and fortunate now, but the end of a life tells the truth of its happiness." Croesus dismissed him with polite contempt. Only later, when his fortunes turned, would he remember Solon's words. Chapter 6. The Fall of Croesus. Solon's warning still lingered in the air. No man could be called truly happy until he had died well. Croesus dismissed the Athenians' words at the time, but fate would soon prove them true. Not long after Solon's departure, Croesus dreamt a terrible dream one of his sons would die from a wound dealt by an iron spearhead. He had 2 sons, one mute from birth, the other, Attis, handsome, intelligent, and commander of the Lydian armies, the pride of his father's heart. Years earlier, Croesus had sought a cure for his mute son at the Oracle of Delphi. The reply was cryptic and cruel. Croesus of Lydia, ruler of many, do not wish to hear your son's voice. It would be better never to hear it at all, for his first words will come on a day of great misfortune. And so, when the dreadful dream came, Croesus knew which son must be protected. He found Attis a bride, withdrew him from the army, and removed every spear and javelin from the palace. The young man protested bitterly, but Croesus would not yield. Chapter 7. The Fatal Hunt. While wedding preparations filled Sardis, a stranger arrived. Adrastus, a Phrygian prince, stained with guilt. He had accidentally killed his own brother and had fled his homeland seeking purification. Croesus, merciful and curious, performed the cleansing rites himself and invited Adrastus to live at court as an honored guest. Soon after, a monstrous boar began ravaging the countryside, tearing fields and frightening farmers. The Lydians pleaded with their king to send Attis to hunt it. Croesus refused until his son confronted him in anger. Attis argued that no boar could kill him with an iron spearhead. If fate had said he would die by a tusk, perhaps, but this was only a hunt, not war. Reluctantly, Croesus agreed and sent Adrastus along as Attis's bodyguard, swearing him to protect the prince at all costs. The hunters found the beast deep in the forest. Spears flew through the air. One of them, Adrastus's, missed its mark and struck Attis, killing him instantly. Croesus's dream had come true. The king was shattered. His grief was made worse by the knowledge that the killer was the man he had taken in and purified. But Croesus, believing in fate, forgave Adrastus, seeing him as a mere instrument of destiny. That night, overwhelmed by guilt, Adrastus took his own life at the prince's tomb. Chapter 8. The Oracle's Deception. 2 years passed in mourning before word reached Sardis of a rising power to the east. A young Persian king named Cyrus had overthrown his grandfather Astyages, seizing control of the Median Empire, an empire that now stretched from the Parthians in the east to Lydia's borders in the west. Croesus saw the writing on the wall. He believed Lydia would be next, and so he decided to strike first. Before waging war, he sent envoys again to Delphi, asking if he should march against the Persians. The oracle replied, "If Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire." Confident that this meant victory, Croesus prepared his armies. But the empire he destroyed was his own. The Persian army defeated him in battle on the plain of Sardis, besieged the city, and captured the Lydian king alive. Ironically, it was Croesus's mute son who saved him from being cut down in the chaos, crying out for the first time, "Do not kill Croesus." The oracle's second prophecy had come to pass. When Sardis fell, the revenge foretold centuries earlier, the vengeance of Candaules upon the 4th generation of Gyges, was finally fulfilled. Chapter 9. The Fire and the Rain. Cyrus, the conqueror, ordered Croesus and 14 Lydian youths to be burned alive, perhaps as a sacrifice or a test of divine power. Bound upon the pyre, Croesus remembered Solon's words. Happiness could only be measured at life's end. As the flames rose, he cried out, "Solon! Solon! Solon! Presentity! Solon! Presentity! Presentity!" When Cyrus asked what he meant, Croesus told him of the Athenian sage and how he had once warned him that human fortune is fragile and fleeting. The story moved Cyrus. He realized that fate could turn even kings to ash, and he ordered the fire to be put out. But it was too late. The flames raged beyond control. Desperate, Croesus prayed aloud to Apollo, begging the god who had once spoken to him at Delphi for mercy. And, as Herodotus records, a sudden storm broke a heavy rain that smothered the fire and spared Croesus's life. Amazed, Cyrus freed him and made the fallen king his advisor. Thus ended the reign of the first great ruler to strike against the Greeks and began the age of the Persians. Chapter 10. The Persian World. Herodotus now turned his gaze from Lydia to Persia, the empire of Cyrus the Great. Unlike the Greeks, the Persians built no temples or statues for their gods, calling those who did fools. They worshipped on high mountain peaks, offering sacrifices to Zeus, Aphrodite, the sun, moon, earth, fire, water, and wind. They celebrated birthdays lavishly, believing it the most important day of the year, but mocked the Greeks for their gluttony. As one Persian saying went, "Greeks always leave the table still hungry." Persians, by contrast, preferred wine to food. When deciding laws or matters of state, they debated each issue twice, once sober, once drunk. And if both judgments matched, the decision stood. Among themselves, they greeted according to rank. Equals kissed on the lips. Those slightly unequal kissed on the cheek. Inferiors prostrated themselves before superiors. The Persians eagerly borrowed what they admired from other cultures: Median clothes for elegance, Egyptian armor for war. They prized sons above all blessings. Each year the king rewarded the man with the most children. Their justice, though strict, was surprisingly thoughtful. No one could be executed for a single crime. But they despised two things: utterly lying and debt, believing that one led to the other. They also treated nature with deep reverence. No one was allowed to spit, urinate, or wash their hands in a river, for water was sacred. Even burial followed strange rules. A Persian body could not be laid to rest until it had been mauled by a bird or dog, returning to the cycle of life. Chapter 11. Babylon the Magnificent. From Persia, Herodotus journeyed to Babylon, whose customs were stranger still. The Babylonians buried their dead in honey, believing it preserved the body. They had no physicians. Instead, the sick sat in the city square, and passers-by who had suffered similar ailments offered advice, a civic duty of compassion. He found tribes who ate nothing but fish. They dried their catch in the sun, soaked it in brine, pounded it into paste, strained it through cloth, and shaped it into cakes or loaves of bread. But Babylon itself was a marvel. Herodotus described it as a colossal city, perfectly square, 60 miles in circumference, encircled by a deep moat and 2 mighty walls. The Euphrates River cut through its center, crossed by bridges, and guarded by brass gates. Its towers rose 3 and 4 stories high, glittering under the desert sun. When Cyrus marched to conquer the city, the Babylonians shut their gates, storing food for a long siege. But his greatest obstacle was not the walls, it was the river Jindus. While preparing to cross it, one of his sacred white horses, drowned in its current. In fury, Cyrus cursed the river, vowing that even women shall cross it without wetting their knees. He delayed his campaign and commanded his army to divide the river into 360 channels, draining its strength before advancing on Babylon. Chapter 12. The Marriage Market of Babylon. Among all the tales Herodotus heard, none shocked him more than Babylon's marriage market. Before Cyrus's conquest, the city held an annual auction where every marriageable woman was sold as a bride. The most beautiful girls fetched high prices from wealthy men. The less attractive were sold cheaply or even given away. The proceeds from the beautiful bride sales were used to pay dowries for the poor or unattractive ones, ensuring every woman found a husband. It was, in a way, both cruel and practical, a reflection of Babylon itself, magnificent, ordered, and utterly alien to the Greek mind. Epilogue: The Historian's Eye. Through these stories of kings, gods, customs, and wars, Herodotus painted not merely history, but humanity. He traveled not to judge, but to understand how power rose and fell, how cultures differed, and how fate bound all men together. In Croesus's downfall and Cyrus's triumph, in Persian law and Babylonian ritual, he saw the same truth. Fortune rules the world, and wisdom belongs only to those who remember how fleeting it is. Chapter 13. The Market of Brides. Herodotus wrote that even the plainest women of Babylon found husbands, for the auctioneers cleverly offset their losses by charging high prices for the beautiful ones. No man could arrange his daughter's marriage privately. Every union was decided at the public market. The rules were simple. A man who purchased a wife was bound to live with her, though if the two proved incompatible, she could be returned. To modern eyes, this custom might seem barbaric, yet Herodotus considered it Babylon's most admirable tradition, one that ensured every woman, regardless of beauty or wealth, found a husband. But after the Persians conquered Babylon, the city fell into moral and economic decline. The custom vanished, replaced by something darker. By Herodotus's own time, impoverished Babylonians were said to sell their daughters' bodies to survive a grim reflection of the city's fall from grandeur. Chapter 14. The Fall of Babylon. When Cyrus the Great crossed the Indus River, punishing it for drowning his sacred horse, he marched on Babylon itself. His first battle took place near Opis, north of the capital, where his forces crushed the Babylonian army. Then began the siege. For nearly a year, Cyrus's men surrounded the mighty city, but its walls were impregnable. The Babylonians mocked the Persians from above, confident that no army could breach their defenses. But then one of Cyrus's engineers proposed a bold idea. The Euphrates River flowed through Babylon, entering beneath its walls. Cyrus ordered a canal to divert the river into a nearby marsh, lowering its level until soldiers could march along the dry riverbed. Under the cover of night, the Persians entered the city through the river's course while the Babylonians feasted inside, unaware their walls had already been bypassed. By dawn, Babylon had fallen. Cyrus, once a mere upstart from the east, now stood as King of Kings, ruler of the Achaemenid Empire, master of the four corners of the world. It happened roughly 46 years before Herodotus's birth, long enough for the legend of his conquests to become myth. At its height, Cyrus's empire stretched from modern-day Turkey to Afghanistan, the largest the world had ever known. But even that was not enough. Chapter 15. The Queen of the Steppe. Far to the north lay a vast expanse of Eurasian grassland, the lands of present-day Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. There dwelled the fierce Massagetæ, nomadic warriors who lived without cities, feared no kings, and worshipped only the sun. They drank the milk of their mares, and their warriors took any women they desired from their tribe. When a tribesman grew too old to live, his kin killed him with ritual care, cooked his flesh with that of his livestock, and shared the meal in a sacred feast. They farmed nothing, living instead by fishing the Araxes River and herding their cattle. For the sun, their only god, they offered swift horses the noblest sacrifice to honor the fastest of beings. Herodotus compared them to the Scythians, whose nomadic ways and dress they shared. But the Massagetae were unlike any people the Persian king had ever faced. And ruling over them was a queen, Tomyris. Chapter 16. The Blood of Kings. Cyrus, determined to bring the Massagetae under his rule, sent envoys to Queen Tomyris proposing marriage, but she saw through his deceit. He did not seek a wife, he sought her kingdom. Tomyris refused, and Cyrus took her rejection as an excuse for war. Before marching north, he sought the counsel of his wisest advisor, Croesus of Lydia, still alive and serving loyally at the Persian court. Croesus advised a trap: leave behind a small Persian force as bait, along with a feast of food and wine. When the Massagetae attacked, they would fall into drunken confusion, easy prey for the main army. Cyrus followed the plan. Tomyris' son, Spargapeses, led the Massagetae vanguard. They slaughtered the Persian bait and, finding the rich wine, drank deeply unaware of its intoxicating power. The trap snapped shut. Cyrus's main army struck and won a terrible victory. Spargapeses was captured alive. When the queen learned what had happened, her rage shook the steppe. She sent a message to Cyrus. "You bloodthirsty man, you conquered my son not by valor, but by deceit. Return him to me, and leave my land unpunished. If you refuse, I swear by the sun I will quench your insatiable thirst for blood." Cyrus ignored her warning. In despair, Spargapeses took his own life, robbing Cyrus of his captive and his bargaining chip. Chapter 17. The Queen's Revenge. The ensuing battle was one of the fiercest between non-Greek nations ever recorded. The Massagetae fought like lions, and by sunset, the Persian army lay in ruins. Cyrus the Great himself fell in combat. When his body was brought before Queen Tomyris, she fulfilled her promise. Holding up his severed head, she said, "Though I live and conquer thee, thou hast undone me, overcoming my son by guile. But as I swore, I will give thee thy fill of blood." She ordered his head to be plunged into a skin filled with human blood, saying, "Drink your fill, Cyrus, you who thirsted for it." Thus ended the life of the greatest conqueror of his age. Chapter 18. The Pharaoh's Land. After Cyrus's death, his son Cambyses II took the throne, inheriting his father's vast dominion. His first ambition was Egypt, the ancient kingdom of the Nile. By the time Herodotus visited in his late 20s, Egypt had already fallen under Persian rule. In the city of Memphis, priests told him the stories of their civilization. The Egyptians, they said, once believed they were the oldest race on earth, until a curious pharaoh named Psammetichus I of the 26th dynasty put that belief to the test. He ordered 2 infants raised in silence by a shepherd forbidden to speak. After 2 years, the children's first word was bekos, the Phrygian word for bread. Thus, Psammetichus declared the Phrygians, not the Egyptians, the world's oldest people, and Egypt accepted second place. Chapter 19. A World in Reverse. Herodotus found that Egyptian life seemed the opposite of Greek custom. Women went to the markets and conducted trade, while men stayed home to weave. Men carried burdens on their heads, women on their shoulders. Women relieved themselves standing, men squatting. The Egyptians ate in public but defecated in private, believing that matters of shame should be hidden, and matters without shame may be done openly. Their priests were all male, unlike in Greece. Where other nations grew their hair long, Egyptian priests shaved their heads, and while others shaved in mourning, Egyptians let their hair and beards grow. They kneaded dough with their feet, but clay and dung with their hands. They practiced circumcision, prized cleanliness above appearance, and washed their bronze cups daily. Herodotus marveled at how much time they devoted to bathing and purity rituals. They were, he wrote, cleaner than any other people on earth. Chapter 20. The Gods of the Nile. The Egyptians worshipped many gods, but Isis and Osiris were revered throughout the land. To Herodotus, Osiris resembled Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, for his festivals were filled with revelry, music, and drink. The priests, however, lived by strict rules, shaving their entire bodies every other day, wearing only linen and papyrus sandals, and abstaining from fish and beans, both deemed impure. They lived on sacred foods provided by the temples, beef, goose, and wine, all prepared at the public's expense. Pigs, by contrast, were considered unclean. Anyone who touched one had to bathe fully clothed in the Nile. No one would marry into a swineherd's family, except another swineherd. Only during the full moon festival of Osiris were pigs sacrificed and eaten, and only then. Goats and cats, however, were nearly divine. Goats were sacred to Pan, one of Egypt's 8 primordial gods, depicted with a goat's head and legs. Herodotus even reported witnessing a shocking public act of goat worship, a woman mating with a goat in broad daylight. Cats and dogs, too, were beloved. When a cat died, a family shaved their eyebrows. For a dog, they shaved their entire body and head. If a house caught fire, Egyptians would save their cats first. Both animals were mummified after death, cats laid to rest in sacred chambers, dogs buried beside their masters. Other animals, mongoose, shrew, hawk, bear, wolf, and crocodile, also received mummification rites. Chapter 21. The Art of Eternity. Herodotus described 3 methods of mummification, each varying by cost. In the finest process, embalmers drew out the brain through the nostrils with an iron hook, cleansed the skull with palm wine and spices, and removed the intestines through an incision in the side. They filled the cavity with aromatic herbs, sewed it closed, and packed the body in natron, a natural salt, for 70 days. Finally, the dried body was wrapped in fine linen bandages, coated with resin, and placed in a carved wooden coffin shaped like a man. This, Herodotus wrote, was how Egyptians preserved eternity, not just the flesh of the dead, but the memory of a civilization that sought to live forever. Chapter 22. The Gift of the Nile. Once the body was sealed in its wooden coffin, it was stored upright along the wall of a burial chamber, the most expensive and prestigious form of mummification. Herodotus marveled at the Egyptians' devotion to such rituals, but even more so at their dependence on the Nile River. He observed that while Greeks looked to the heavens for rain, Egyptians looked to the Nile's floods for life. To the Egyptians, the Greek faith in rain was absurd. "What will you eat when the gods refuse to send rain?" they asked. Herodotus smiled at the irony, noting that if the Nile ever failed to flood, Egypt too would starve. From this exchange grew one of his most enduring questions. Why does the Nile flood, and where does it come from? Chapter 23. The Mystery of the River. Many Greek scholars had already offered theories about the Nile's floods, but Herodotus found their explanations foolish. One claimed that melting snow from the Ethiopian highlands caused the annual overflow. We now know this was partly true, but Herodotus could not accept the idea of snow in hot Africa. Instead, he proposed that in winter the north wind drove the sun southward toward Egypt. There, the sun's heat sucked up the waters, causing them to spread over the fields, hence the seasonal flooding. Strange as this may sound today, it reflected his genuine attempt to understand natural laws through logic rather than myth. When he inquired about the river's source, a scribe of the temple of Neith Athena told him of Elephantine, a border town at Egypt's southern frontier. The island, shaped like an elephant's tusk, lay amid treacherous waters that no boat could safely cross. Beneath its whirlpools, the scribe claimed, lay a bottomless pit from which the Nile itself sprang. To prove this, the ancient king Psammetichus had supposedly ordered a rope lowered into the pit, but no bottom could be found. Herodotus doubted the tale, but agreed that Elephantine marked the point where the Nile truly entered Egypt. Today, that island still lies in the Nile near Aswan, its legends surviving in the current's eternal roar. Herodotus concluded that Egypt was the gift of the Nile. Without it, no crops, cities, or civilization could have existed. Even in his time, he noted, 95% of Egyptians lived within 12 miles of the river's banks, a truth that remains today. Chapter 24. The Tale of Rhampsinitus and the Thief. Among the stories Herodotus heard in Memphis was that of King Rhampsinitus, a ruler famed for his vast wealth. He built a secret treasury chamber, so cleverly designed that no one could enter except its architect, who left a hidden entrance only he knew. Before dying, the architect revealed the secret to his two sons. After his death, they began to plunder the treasury at night, taking just enough to avoid suspicion. But when the thefts continued, Rhampsinitus ordered traps placed within the chamber. The next time the thieves entered, one brother was caught. Realizing dawn was near, he urged his sibling to cut off his head so that his identity would remain unknown. The surviving brother obeyed and escaped. In the morning, the king found the headless body and hung it on the city wall, declaring that anyone seen mourning would be seized. The mother, in anguish, demanded her living son retrieve the corpse. To save her from disgrace, the son devised a bold plan. He loaded a donkey with wineskins, then walked past the guards, deliberately spilling the wine so that it flowed everywhere. When the thirsty guards stooped to drink, he plied them with more until they fell into drunken sleep. Then he cut down his brother's body and disappeared into the night. Enraged but impressed, the king set another trap. He instructed his daughter to act as a courtesan and question each suitor. "What is the cleverest and the wickedest thing you have ever done?" The thief, hearing of this, prepared his trick. He brought with him a false arm, stolen from an embalmer's workshop. When asked, he confessed, "The worst thing I ever did was behead my brother. The cleverest, to steal his body from the guards." As she reached to seize him, she grasped only the fake arm, and he vanished once more. When the king learned of this, he laughed aloud and proclaimed, "This man outwits us all. Let him come forth and be pardoned." The thief appeared, and Rhampsinitus, true to his word, forgave him and married him to his daughter, saying, "We Egyptians are famed for our wit, but this man surpasses us all. Chapter 25. The Tyrant of the Pyramids. After Rhampsinitus came Cheops, whom the Egyptians called Khufu, a name remembered with hatred. According to the priests, Cheops closed the temples, forbade sacrifices, and enslaved his people to build a tomb unlike any the world had seen. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Herodotus recorded that 100,000 laborers worked in shifts of 3 months each. It took 10 years to build the Great Causeway to transport the stone blocks, and 20 years more to raise the pyramid itself. Each side measured 800 feet, the height the same. The blocks were polished limestone, each no less than 30 feet long, fitted so precisely that not even a knife blade could slip between them. The structure rose like a staircase. Workers lifted the stones using wooden machines, passing each block from one level to the next. They finished the top first, working downward to the base. Their meals were simple radishes, onions, and garlic, and a tablet Herodotus claimed to have seen stated that their food alone cost 1,600 talents of silver over the years of construction. The Greeks would later admire the pyramid's grandeur, but the Egyptians never forgave their king. They refused even to speak his name, believing it cursed. To Herodotus, the pyramid was a wonder beyond compare, more immense than all the Greek temples combined. Chapter 26. The Labyrinth and the Lake of Moeris. Beyond the pyramids lay another marvel, the Labyrinth of Crocodilopolis. Herodotus called it a structure surpassing all description. It contained 3,000 rooms, half above ground, half below. He himself explored the upper-level endless halls, winding corridors, and chambers filled with intricate carvings. The lower level, said to house the tombs of the kings, was forbidden to all but the priests. The walls were of stone, the roofs carved from single slabs, and the courtyards paved with white marble. At the far end rose a pyramid 240 feet high, decorated with colossal figures and an underground entrance. But even this, Herodotus claimed, was outdone by the Lake of Moeris, an artificial reservoir 91 meters deep and 413 miles in circumference. It stretched almost the length of Egypt itself. The pharaohs had engineered it to control the Nile's waters, a feat as miraculous as the pyramids. In its center stood 2 towering pyramids, each 182 meters tall, half submerged in water. Upon their summits sat stone statues enthroned like gods gazing across the endless lake. Chapter 27. The Persian Conquest. After the wonders came war. When Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, became the new king of kings, he turned his eyes toward Egypt. The reigning pharaoh, Amasis II, sealed his fate through 2 fatal errors. First, he offended the Persian court by sending his eye doctor into forced service abroad. The physician, insulted, plotted revenge. He advised Cambyses to request Amasis's daughter in marriage, knowing the proud Egyptian king would never consent. Instead, Amasis deceived him, sending not his own daughter, but that of the previous pharaoh. When she arrived in Persia, she revealed the truth. Cambyses was enraged. The final blow came from Phanes of Halicarnassus, a Greek mercenary once trusted by Amasis. After falling out with the pharaoh, Phanes defected to Persia, offering strategic advice and a map of Egypt's defenses. He guided Cambyses through the desert and convinced the Arabian king to grant safe passage across the trade route from Gaza to Pelusium, the very road that would lead the Persian army to Egypt's gates. Thus began the campaign that would end Egypt's independence, the last act in the long story. Herodotus called The Wars of Kings and Gods, of Wisdom and Folly. Chapter 28. The War for Egypt. Arabia and Egypt had long been bitter rivals, and when Cambyses II, king of Persia, sought passage through Arabian lands to invade Egypt, the Arabian ruler eagerly agreed. Egypt's fall would mean his own kingdom's safety. Not only did he grant passage, he also supplied men, camels, and water for the Persian campaign. Yet before the invasion began, Pharaoh Amasis Ahmose died peacefully, escaping the humiliation that was to come. His son Psammetichus III inherited both his throne and his father's unfinished war against Persia. Without the counsel of Phanes of Halicarnassus, the defector who had betrayed Egypt to the Persians, Psammetichus was doomed from the start. Before battle, Egyptian generals exacted revenge upon Phanes in the only way they could. They captured his sons, slit their throats in sight of the Persian lines, drained their blood into a bowl of wine, and drank it as an oath of vengeance. Then, the two armies clashed, and Egypt's courage could not withstand Persia's might. The Egyptians fled, and Cambyses marched victoriously across the Nile plain. Chapter 29. The Fall of Memphis. Seeking peace, Cambyses sent envoys on a Mytilenean ship to negotiate a truce with Memphis. But the Egyptians, enraged and humiliated, seized the vessel, butchered the envoys, and carried their dismembered remains through the city in triumph. It was an act that sealed their fate. In retaliation, Cambyses stormed Memphis, slaughtering 10 noble Egyptians for every Persian slain on the ship. He captured the pharaoh's son and executed him before his eyes, then spared the broken king's life only for Psammetichus to take his own soon after, unable to bear his shame. Egypt had fallen, but even victory could not satisfy Cambyses. The dead Amasis, who had deceived him with a false bride, still haunted him. Furious that he could not punish a corpse, Cambyses ordered Amasis's mummified body, exhumed, scourged, stabbed, torn, and finally burned. The act horrified both Persians and Egyptians. To Persians, fire was divine and never to be defiled. To Egyptians, it was a living being, and to burn a body was to destroy its soul. Thus, Cambyses had committed sacrilege against both peoples, a foretaste of the madness to come. Chapter 30. The Kingdom at the Ends of the Earth. Having conquered Egypt, Cambyses turned his gaze southward, toward the fabled land of Ethiopia, said to lie at the very ends of the earth. He sent spies disguised as envoys, bearing gifts, a purple cloak, a chain of gold, rare perfumes, and wine to test the Ethiopian king's strength and generosity. But the king saw through the deception. "You are no envoys," he told them, "but spies." Still, he spared their lives and led them through his realm to show what true kingship looked like. The Persians were astonished. The Ethiopians, they saw, were taller, stronger, and more beautiful than any people they had known. Their citizens lived, on average, 40 years longer than Persians. They bathed in a lake whose waters shimmered like olive oil and smelled of violets, and their slaves wore shackles of solid gold, heavier than any gift the Persians had brought. At last, the king offered the envoys a mighty bow, saying, "Take this to your master and tell him when the Persians can draw bows such as mine, then let him march against the sons of Ethiopia. Until then, he should thank the gods that we have no desire for other lands." When Cambyses heard the message, rage consumed him. He launched an expedition immediately, ignoring every warning. But Ethiopia was too far, and his army too ill-prepared. By the time they had marched 1/5 of the journey, provisions ran out. They slaughtered their pack animals. Then the grass. Then, in desperation, they turned to cannibalism, casting lots to choose 10 men to eat. At last, Cambyses abandoned the campaign and staggered back to Egypt with what remained of his army broken, starving, and mad. Chapter 31. The Madness of a King. When he returned to Memphis, Cambyses found the Egyptians feasting and dancing. They were celebrating the festival of Apis, the sacred bull god of fertility and the underworld. But the Persian king, thinking they mocked his failure, flew into a frenzy. He summoned the city's governors and demanded an explanation. When they told him it was a religious festival, he called them liars and executed them. Then he brought forth the priests of Apis, who repeated the same truth. Still unconvinced, Cambyses demanded to see the god himself. Apis, a black calf marked with white, was carried before him, a living god born, the priest said, when a ray of light descended upon its mother. Cambyses laughed, drew his dagger, and stabbed the calf in the thigh. "Fools!" he shouted. "You worship creatures of flesh and blood that can bleed." He ordered the priests flogged and banned all worship of Apis. Soon after, the wounded bull died, and terror spread through Egypt. From this moment, Herodotus wrote, Cambyses lost his sanity completely. Chapter 32. Blood and Shadows. Consumed by paranoia, Cambyses turned against his own family. His brother Smerdis, the only man strong enough to draw the Ethiopian's bow, became his first target. Envy turned to fear when Cambyses dreamed of Smerdis sitting upon the Persian throne, his head touching the heavens. He sent his most trusted officer, Praxaspes, to kill him, and the deed was done. Soon after, Cambyses married one of his sisters, then, falling in love with another, murdered the first and took the second as his wife. When rumors spread of his madness, he called Praxaspes before him to prove his sanity. "Do I seem insane to you?" he asked, then picked up a bow and shot an arrow straight through Praxaspes' son's heart. "If I were mad," he said coldly, "could I have made that shot?" Chapter 33. The Magi's Deception. While Cambyses descended into chaos in Egypt, two Magi brothers in Persia seized the moment. One of them, named Smerdis, shared both the name and the likeness of the dead prince. They spread the rumor that Cambyses' brother still lived and now ruled Persia in his stead. No one knew the true Smerdis was dead, only Cambyses and Praxaspes. When the king heard of the supposed usurpation, he accused Praxaspes of treachery. But Praxaspes swore he had obeyed his order. Determined to confront the impostors himself, Cambyses mounted his horse to ride to Susa, and in doing so, accidentally wounded his thigh with his own sword in the very spot he had struck the bull god Apis. The wound festered, and Herodotus says the king recognized divine retribution. Lying on his deathbed, he confessed to his nobles that he had killed his brother unjustly and warned them of the Magi's plot. But they thought him delirious. 20 days later, Cambyses too died, childless and unredeemed. Chapter 34. The False King. In Persia, the Magi's deception succeeded. The impostor Smerdis ruled for 7 months, generous to the people and loved by all. But among the nobles, suspicion grew. One lord, Otanes, whose daughter Phidemia had been married first to Cambyses and now to the new king, sought proof. He told her to feel for the king's ears as he slept, for the real Smerdis had lost his ears long ago, cut off by Cyrus himself. That night she discovered the truth: the man in her bed was a magus, Otanes gathered 6 other nobles, including Darius, the son of Histispes, a cousin of Cyrus the Great. Together they planned to kill the impostor. Darius urged them to act swiftly, before their plot was betrayed. Meanwhile, the Magi tried to recruit Praxispes, the only man who knew the truth. They promised him riches and power if he declared the false Smyrtus legitimate. Praxispes climbed a tower to speak to the people, but instead of supporting the Magi, he revealed their deceit, confessed to killing the true Smyrtus at Cambyses' command, and denounced the impostors. When he had finished, he leapt from the tower to his death. Chapter 35. The Rise of Darius. The 7 nobles stormed the palace, slew the Magi, and restored order. In the chaos that followed, Darius seized the throne, becoming the new King of Kings. He reorganized the empire into 20 provinces, each paying tribute according to its wealth. From the east came the riches of India, gold dust gathered by tribes along the edge of the world. Herodotus wrote that some Indian peoples lived in marshes, clothed in reeds. Others were nomads, who ate raw meat and practiced ritual cannibalism, killing the sick before disease could spoil their flesh. To them, death by illness was a disgrace. Better to die by a friend's hand and be shared in a feast of loyalty. Farther north dwelled tribes who harmed no living thing, surviving on wild seeds and roots. And beyond them, in the deserts of the Himalayan foothills, were the gold seekers. There, said Herodotus, giant ants the size of foxes dug through the sand, bringing up grains of gold. The Indians harnessed teams of 3 camels and raided the sands during the hottest hours of the day when the monstrous ants hid from the sun. They filled their bags with golden dust and fled before the creatures could emerge. Whether these beasts were myth or misinterpretation, perhaps Himalayan marmots, as modern scholars suggest, Herodotus never doubted their existence. To him, it was proof that the world was vast, wondrous, and filled with marvels beyond imagining. Chapter 36. The Desert of Gold and Fire. Among the many marvels of the world Herodotus described, none seemed stranger than the Persian tale of the gold-digging ants. According to Persian belief, these creatures were the fastest animals on earth, gifted with a keen sense of smell. When the Indians crept into the desert to steal gold from their burrows, the ants would scent them from afar and give chase. To escape, the Indians released the slower male camels as sacrifices, while the females, swifter and more enduring, carried their masters to safety with their golden spoils. The Indians brought this dust of gold to King Darius, but Arabia's tribute was of another kind entirely. From that land came the fragrant wealth of the south, the resins and spices that perfumed temples and palaces across the ancient world. Chapter 37. The Perfumes of Arabia. Herodotus called Arabia the farthest inhabited land toward the sun, and the only place where the world's rarest aromatics grew. There could be found frankincense, myrrh, cassia, cinnamon, and the resin of the rock rose. Of these, only myrrh was easily gathered. The others demanded courage, cunning, and more than a little madness. To harvest frankincense, the Arabs ventured into groves guarded by winged serpents, small and spotted, fierce as hornets. They burned storax resin, a thick, pungent smoke that drove the snakes away long enough to cut the bark and gather the gum. The collectors of cassia faced another terror. The trees grew in shallow lakes swarming with winged creatures like enormous bats. Their shrieks filled the air when startled, so the Arabs wrapped themselves in ox hide and leather, leaving only the eyes exposed, and waded through the water to pluck the precious bark. The origin of cinnamon was more mysterious still. Some claimed it grew in the same sacred land where Dionysus had been raised. Others swore that giant birds carried the sticks to their nests, built high upon inaccessible cliffs. To obtain them, the Arabs placed the carcasses of dead pack animals near the cliffs. When the birds swooped down to carry the heavy meat, their nests collapsed under the weight, and the gatherers collected the cinnamon scattered below. Lastly came the resin of the rock rose, scraped from the beards of male goats that grazed on aromatic shrubs. Though gathered in foul-smelling places, the resin itself was sweet and pure, prized in perfumes and temple incense. Of all the gifts Arabia sent to the world, Herodotus said, this was the most common smoke on their altars. Chapter 38. The Trial of the Rebels. After Darius became king of kings and divided his vast empire into 20 provinces, each with its own tribute, he faced his first great test, not from foreign lands, but from within. One of the 6 nobles who had helped him slay the Magi and seize the throne, Intafernus, believed his privilege of seeing the king at will made him untouchable. One day he tried to enter Darius's chamber, only to be stopped by guards who said the king was with his wife. In fury, Intafernus drew his sword and mutilated the guards, cutting off their ears and noses. When Darius learned of this outrage, he feared the nobles were plotting rebellion. He summoned each of the 6 and questioned them one by one until he found that Intafernus had acted alone. The guilty man, his sons, and all his male kin were thrown into prison. Intafernus's wife came weeping to the palace gates, pleading for mercy. The king was moved and granted her a single choice. She might save one family member. After long thought, she chose her brother. Darius was astonished. "Why not your husband, or one of your sons?" he asked. She replied calmly, "I can find another husband and bear other sons, but since my parents are gone, I can never have another brother." Admiring her wisdom, Darius spared both her brother and her eldest son, but executed the rest. Thus ended the rebellion before it could begin. Chapter 39. The Siege of Babylon. A year later came the second trial, the Babylonian Revolt. The city had long brooded under Persian rule, and during the confusion after Cambyses' death, it prepared for freedom. When Darius took the throne, Babylon struck. Knowing that a siege would come, the Babylonians made a dreadful decision. They strangled every woman in the city except their mothers, and one woman per household to bake bread so their food would last. When Darius arrived with his army, he besieged Babylon for 20 months. He tried every tactic Cyrus had used before him, but the city's walls held firm. From the towers, the defenders mocked the Persians. "Why linger, men of Persia? Babylon will fall to you only when mules bear young." The taunt seemed safe enough, for mules are sterile. But in the 20th month, one of Darius's commanders, Zopyrus, witnessed his mule giving birth. Taking it as a divine omen, he conceived a desperate plan. Chapter 40. The Deception of Zopyrus. Zopyrus, the son of Megabyzus, one of the 6 nobles who had helped Darius seize power, mutilated himself, cutting off his own nose and ears. He appeared before the king, bleeding and disfigured. Darius was horrified, thinking the man mad. But Zopyrus explained, "I have done this so that the Babylonians will trust me when I claim you punished me. Let me go to them as a deserter. When they believe my story, I will open their gates for you." It was madness and brilliance. Zopyrus rode to Babylon, where the guards, seeing his mutilated face, welcomed him as a fellow victim of Darius's cruelty. He told them he had come to help destroy the Persians in revenge. They gave him command of the army, and he led them to several staged victories, each time defeating small Persian detachments that Darius had deliberately sent against him. As his reputation grew, the Babylonians trusted him completely. When Zopyrus finally commanded the city's gates, he gave the signal. The Persians stormed in, and Babylon fell once more. Darius razed its mighty walls, impaled 3,000 of its nobles, and repopulated the city with 50,000 women from neighboring towns to restore its numbers. Zopyrus, honored as a national hero, was made governor of Babylon, exempt from taxes for life. Darius often said, "I would rather have Zopyrus whole again than win 20 Babylons." Chapter 41. The Lands of the North. After subduing Babylon, Darius turned his gaze to the northern frontier, toward Scythia, the land of wandering horsemen who claimed descent from Heracles himself. They were fierce, elusive, and proud of their youth as a people. The Scythians had twice enslaved the Medes, Darius's ancestors, and were notorious for blinding their captives. They were, in his eyes, an ancient insult that demanded vengeance. Herodotus wrote that when the Scythians first left their homeland for war, they were gone 28 years. During their absence, their wives lay with slaves and bore new sons. When the warriors returned, these sons resisted them, forcing the veterans to fight for their homes. One Scythian advised using horsewhips instead of swords, declaring that the rebels only fought bravely because they were treated as equals. When the whips cracked, the slaves fled in terror, and the Scythians reclaimed their kingdom. Herodotus himself traveled to Scythia around 441 BC, long after these wars, and found a people who revered the same gods as Greece, Hestia, Zeus, and Earth, though they built no temples or statues, save for one to Ares, god of war. There, each province kept a great altar of sticks, crowned with an iron blade symbolizing the god. Every year, they sacrificed horses, cattle, and prisoners of war, pouring their blood upon the dagger. Chapter 42. The Customs of Blood. In Scythia, war was both religion and art. When a man killed his first enemy, he drank the blood. To claim spoils, he had to present the severed heads of the slain to his king. He then flayed their scalps, scraped them clean, and stitched them into ribbons for his horse's bridle. The more scalp strips a warrior carried, the greater his honor. The Scythians used their enemies' skulls as drinking cups, lining them with gold if the foe was noble. Even family feuds were settled the same way, one relative killing another before the king, then drinking from his skull as proof of courage. The burial of a Scythian king was a spectacle of sorrow and blood. The body was embalmed with wax and spices, carried from tribe to tribe while mourners cut their ears, slashed their arms, and pierced their hands in grief. Finally, he was buried in a vast square pit lined with wood and rushes, surrounded by strangled servants, concubines, horses, and possessions. Only bronze and silver were spared. Over it all they raised a mountain of earth as his tomb. Chapter 43. The War That Never Was. When Herodotus reached their lands, the Scythians proudly told him how they had once defeated Darius himself without ever fighting a battle. In 513 BC, 26 years before Herodotus's birth, the Persian king crossed the Danube River on a bridge built by his Ionian Greek allies. He ordered the bridge destroyed after he crossed, but one Greek advised him to keep it for retreat. Darius agreed, posting the Ionians to guard it for 60 days. The Scythians refused his summons to surrender. Instead, They divided into 3 armies and practiced a cunning strategy of retreat and exhaustion. Whenever Darius advanced, they vanished into the endless plains, burning their fields behind them. He pursued them through a land with no cities to sack, no crops to seize, and no roads to follow. His men starved, his horses weakened, and his patience broke. At last, Darius halted near the Volga River and sent a furious message to Inaccuracies, king of the Scythians, a demand for submission that would meet an answer unlike any he expected. Chapter 44. The Scythian Reply. When Darius sent his furious letter to the Scythians, demanding they either stand and fight or submit with gifts of earth and water, his words were filled with imperial arrogance. "Why do you flee like cowards?" he wrote. "If you believe you can resist me, stop this wandering and face me in battle. But if you know you are weaker, cease your running and come before me as servants, bringing tokens of your surrender." To the Persians, earth and water meant absolute submission, a recognition that the land and all who lived on it belonged to the King of Kings. But Inaccuracies, ruler of the Scythians, answered with cold defiance. He said he had no intention of surrendering, and just as little desire to fight. "We have neither cities nor crops for you to burn," he declared. "If you wish to find us, seek our ancestors' graves. Only if you defile them will we make war upon you." This simple reply crushed Darius's ambitions. He came to realize that one cannot conquer a people who have nothing to lose and nowhere to defend. The Scythians only waited for the Persians to exhaust their supplies before striking. At last, Darius ordered a retreat. His vast army turned back toward the bridge of boats over the Danube, retracing their steps through the bleak, empty steppe. Chapter 45. The Bridge and the Betrayal. The Scythians, ever cunning, reached the bridge long before the Persians. There they found the Ionian Greeks whom Darius had left to guard it. They urged the Greeks to destroy the bridge, trap the Persians on the wrong side of the river, and free themselves from Persian slavery. The Greeks debated the proposal among themselves. At last, Histiaeus of Miletus persuaded them not to destroy it. Instead, they pretended to dismantle a portion of the bridge visible from the opposite bank, fooling the Scythians into thinking their advice had been followed. When the Scythians left to finish off the Persians, the Greeks quickly restored the bridge. By the time Darius and his starving army arrived, the structure still stood and they crossed safely back into Thrace. The Scythians never forgave this deceit. They mocked the Ionians forever after, saying, "The Greeks are the worst and most cowardly of free men." But as slaves, no master could wish for better servants. Chapter 46. The Peoples of Libya. Before the disastrous Scythian War, Darius had already extended his empire westward, bringing parts of Libya under Persian rule. In 440 BC, Herodotus himself traveled through these lands and recorded what he saw. The first tribes he met were the Adarmachidae, descendants of Egyptians who had migrated west. They lived between Egypt and a bay called Plinus, keeping Egyptian customs but wearing Libyan dress. During marriage festivals, their maidens paraded before the king, and the one who pleased him most shared his bed that night. West of them lived the Gilligame, and beyond them, around the great lake Tritonis, were the Machles and the Ausians, divided by the river Triton. The Machles grew their hair long at the back, the Ausians at the front. Each year, the young women of the Ausians held a festival for their goddess, whom the Greeks identified as Athena, where they split into 2 bands and fought each other with sticks and stones. Those who died in these ritual combats were believed not to have been true virgins. Before the battle began, the fairest maiden was dressed in Greek armor, given a Corinthian helmet, and paraded around the lake in a chariot as an offering to the goddess. The Ausians also lived with a remarkable freedom of custom. They shared their partners openly, and when a child was born, the men gathered to decide the father by resemblance. Further west lived the Maxes, an agricultural people who built houses and farmed the fertile land. They shaved the left side of their heads and let the right side grow long, painting their bodies with red ochre. The Libyan desert was filled, they told Herodotus, with creatures beyond imagination, two-headed beasts, headless men with eyes in their chests, lions, asps, elephants, horned donkeys, and serpents of monstrous size. Whether myth or truth, Herodotus recorded them faithfully, for he believed every story had a grain of the divine in it. Chapter 47. The Ambitions of Megabazus. The conquest of Libya had been possible thanks to Megabazus, Darius's most trusted general. When Darius abandoned his Scythian campaign and returned to Sardis, he left Megabazus behind in Europe with 80,000 men and a simple order: bring all the cities of the Hellespont under my dominion. Megabazus obeyed with ruthless precision. He subdued the Paeonians, marched through Thrace, and compelled every tribe and settlement to bow before Persia. When word of his success reached Sardis, Darius summoned Histiaeus of Miletus, rewarding him richly for his loyalty at the Danube Bridge. Histiaeus became one of the king's closest counselors, while Megabazus continued his conquests in the north. To secure Darius's influence further, Megabazus sent 7 noble Persians to the kingdom of Macedon, demanding the usual tokens, earth and water. King Amyntas agreed, offering them hospitality in a great banquet. But when the Persians, drunk with wine and arrogance, demanded to see the Macedonian women forbidden by custom to dine with men, the king reluctantly complied. When the Persians began groping the women, Amyntas's son, Alexander of Macedon, could bear it no longer. He sent his father away under the pretense of rest and told the Persians he would bring the women back freshly bathed. Instead, he returned with young Macedonian warriors disguised as women, daggers hidden in their robes. When the Persians tried again to touch them, the false maidens struck, killing them all. Alexander hid the bodies and kept their death secret, sparing Macedon from the wrath of Darius. Chapter 48. Seeds of Rebellion. Meanwhile, Megabazus grew suspicious of Histiaeus. The Greek ruler of Miletus had been granted land in Thrace by Darius, a region rich in timber and shipbuilding materials, and was fortifying it as if it were his own kingdom. Megabazus warned the king, "My lord, you have allowed a cunning Greek to build a stronghold by the sea, where he may one day raise ships against you. End this before it grows." Darius listened. Though he trusted Histiaeus, he summoned him to court and forbade him from leaving, keeping him near as an honored captive. In his absence, Miletus was ruled by his son-in-law Aristagoras, ambitious, clever, and eager for glory. Soon after, exiles from the island of Naxos came to Aristagoras begging for help to reclaim their home. Seeing a chance to expand his power, Aristagoras approached Artaphernes, Darius's half-brother and satrap of Sardis, requesting Persian troops and ships for the campaign. Artaphernes secured the king's approval, but after 3 months of fighting, the invasion failed disastrously. Fearing Darius's wrath for wasting Persian resources, Aristagoras decided that rebellion was safer than punishment. Thus began the Ionian Revolt. Chapter 49. The Message of Fire. Herodotus, however, offered another version. He claimed that the revolt had not started with Aristagoras's fear, but with Histiaeus's longing. Tired of captivity at the Persian court, Histiaeus devised a secret message. He shaved the head of a trusted slave, tattooed the word revolt upon the man's scalp, and waited for the hair to grow back before sending him to Miletus. When Aristogoras shaved the slave's head and read the hidden words, he knew what to do. Darius, unaware of this treachery, allowed Histiaeus to return home to restore order. By then, the fire had already spread. Chapter 50. The Spark That Lit the Wars. Aristogoras sought allies. He went first to Sparta, ruled by King Cleomenes. To persuade him, Aristogoras spoke of Persian riches, gold, silver, and slaves beyond imagining, and of how easy the conquest would be. Cleomenes asked how long the journey to Persia would take. When Aristogoras admitted it was 3 months, the Spartan king ordered him to leave at once, saying, "Your words are long, and your road is longer." Rejected in Sparta, Aristogoras turned to Athens, where democracy gave him a more receptive audience. He pleaded his cause before the assembly, promising glory and revenge. The Athenians, ever eager for adventure, voted to send 20 ships to aid the Ionian cause, a small fleet that would change the course of history. The revolt spread quickly. Cities like Ephesus, Smyrna, and Byzantium joined in, striking Persian garrisons and freeing their ports. In 498 BCE, the rebels attacked Sardis, capital of Lydia. They burned the city to the ground, though its citadel held firm. Among those trapped inside was Artaphernes, who barely escaped the flames. The destruction of Sardis enraged Darius beyond measure. He vowed revenge not only on the rebels, but on the city that had dared to aid them, Athens. It was this vow that would ignite the long and terrible struggle known as the Greco-Persian Wars, the battles of Marathon, Plataea, and Salamis, the wars into which Herodotus himself had been born. Chapter 51. The War of Vengeance. The fires of rebellion that had begun in Ionia did not end there. They would ignite a war that changed the world. After the burning of Sardis, King Darius unleashed a ruthless counterattack. The Persian retaliation was swift, calculated, and merciless. Every Ionian city that had joined the uprising was crushed. Miletus was captured, its men slain, and its women and children sold into slavery. Histiaeus was executed, his severed head sent to the king, who still refused to believe that his once beloved Greek could have betrayed him. The Ionian revolt was over, but Darius's wrath was not satisfied. Now he turned his gaze toward Athens, whose small fleet had fanned the flames of rebellion. Athens, he swore, would burn. Chapter 52. The Battle of Marathon. In 492 BCE, Darius sent his son-in-law Mardonius to subdue Greece. But fate intervened. A violent storm near Mount Athos destroyed 300 Persian ships and countless men. The invasion was delayed, giving Athens the gift of time to prepare, to pray, and to rally. Among them was a man named Miltiades, a former Persian subject who knew the empire's tactics. He urged the Athenians to meet the enemy not at their walls, but on the plains of Marathon, where the flat ground would favor their hoplite phalanx over the Persians' archers. The Athenians consulted the oracle of Delphi and received divine assurance. They believed the gods, and their hero, Theseus, fought at their side. So Miltiades led 10,000 Athenians, supported by 1,000 men from Plataea, to face a far greater host. When the Persians landed, the Greeks charged without hesitation. Their bronze shields and spears shattered the Persian line. Their discipline overcame the arrows that darkened the sky. When the dust cleared, 6,000, 400 Persians lay dead upon the plain. Only 192 Athenians had fallen. The Battle of Marathon became the dawn of Greek confidence, a proof that men defending their freedom could triumph over an empire. For Darius, however, it was an unforgivable insult. His rage shook Asia as he vowed to raise a new army that would grind Athens into dust. Chapter 53. The Death of Darius and the Rise of Xerxes. For 3 years, all Asia labored under the weight of Darius's preparations for vengeance. But before the campaign could begin, Egypt revolted against Persian rule, demanding freedom. Darius prepared to punish them as well, yet before he could march, death claimed him in 486 BCE. His son, Xerxes, born of Atassa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, ascended the throne. The new king quickly crushed the Egyptian revolt, enslaving them more brutally than before. But he hesitated to pursue his father's vendetta against the Greeks. The defeat at Marathon still haunted the empire, and the vast expense of war weighed heavily on him. It was Mardonius, his cousin and trusted advisor, who rekindled the fire. He argued that conquering Greece would immortalize Xerxes' name beside that of Cyrus and Darius. At last, the young king consented the invasion would proceed. Chapter 54. The Gates of Fire. Across the Aegean, Greece united in the face of doom. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Thebes, Thespiae, city-states that had quarreled for generations, now stood together. Their plan was simple. Hold the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where mountains met the sea, and deny the Persians entry. In 480 BCE, King Leonidas of Sparta led 7,000 Greeks, including his famed 300 Spartans, to defend the pass. When Xerxes demanded their surrender, "Lay down your arms," he said. Leonidas replied with words that echoed through eternity. "Come and take them." For 3 days, the Greeks held back an army of hundreds of thousands. Shield to shield, spear to spear, they fought until treachery undid them. A local shepherd named Ephialtes revealed a hidden mountain path to the Persians, guiding them behind the Greek line. Surrounded, Leonidas dismissed his allies, choosing to die with his 300. They fought to the last man, and their sacrifice bought Greece the most precious gift in wartime. Thermopylae fell, but the spirit of Greece was unbroken. Chapter 55. The Storm and the Sea. While the pass burned with blood, the Greek fleet assembled at Artemisium 127 Athenian ships, 40 Corinthian, 20 Megarian, and others from allied states. Their commander was Eurybiades of Sparta, but the soul of the navy was the Athenian Themistocles. As the Persian fleet attempted to encircle them, a storm struck. 200 Persian ships were shattered upon the rocks, an act the Greeks took as proof of divine favor. Yet even so, they knew they could not hold forever. Themistocles saw that Athens would soon fall, so he made the hardest choice of all. He evacuated the city, sending every citizen, women, children, the elderly, across the strait to the island of Salamis. Only the warriors remained. If Athens must burn, then it would burn empty. Chapter 56. The Battle of Salamis. 5 months after Thermopylae, the Persians returned, their fleet vast and confident. Themistocles devised a plan of deception. He sent a secret message to Xerxes, claiming that the Greeks intended to flee. Believing victory at hand, the Persian fleet entered the narrow straits of Salamis, where its great numbers became a curse. The Greek triremes, swift and maneuverable, struck from both sides. The Persians' enormous ships, trapped in the confined waters, collided with one another as the Greeks rammed and boarded them. By the day's end, the Persian navy lay in ruins. Salamis was a turning point, the moment when courage and cunning overcame might. Xerxes, humiliated, returned to Persia, leaving Mardonius in command of the remaining army in Greece. Chapter 57. Plataea and Mycale. Mardonius marched south, occupying the ruins of Athens, but found the city deserted, its people still sheltering on Salamis. Realizing he could not hold Greece by fear alone, he tried to bribe its divided cities into submission. Only Thebes, out of hatred for Athens, joined his cause. The rest of Greece rallied under a single banner. Pausanias of Sparta, nephew of Leonidas, was chosen as supreme commander. The Greeks advanced to the plain of Plataea, where they took the high ground and built wooden palisades for defense. Mardonius struck first, sending waves of archers and cavalry, but the tight phalanx of hoplites' shields locked, spears braced, repelled every assault. Then, a Spartan warrior named Aristodemus speared Mardonius in the chaos. The death of their general broke the Persian will. Their lines collapsed, and the Greeks counterattacked, slaughtering the invaders as they fled. At the same time, far away at Mycale, the Greek fleet under Leotychides destroyed what remained of the Persian navy. By land and by sea, the Persian power in Greece was shattered forever. Chapter 58. The Legacy of Freedom. The year was 479 BCE. The Greeks had secured their freedom with blood, sweat, and fire. And in Halicarnassus, a child of 5 named Herodotus was growing up amid stories of gods, kings, and heroes. As he matured, he would travel the known world to Egypt, Babylon, Persia, and beyond, seeking to understand why men went to war and what made nations rise and fall. He witnessed tyranny firsthand in his own homeland, under the despot Lygdamus, who had slain his uncle and driven his family into exile. In 454 BCE, Herodotus joined a rebellion that finally overthrew the tyrant, freeing his city forever. Soon after, he joined settlers founding Thurii in southern Italy, where he spent his later years writing the Histories, the first great attempt to record not myth, but truth. He may have visited Athens, reading aloud his stories to captivated crowds. One legend tells that at Olympia, a boy named Thucydides heard him speak and wept. Herodotus, seeing this, told the boy's father, "Your son's soul yearns for knowledge." Thucydides would grow to become his successor, a historian of reason, where Herodotus had been one of wonder. Sometime between 425 and 413 BCE, Herodotus died, leaving behind the book that made him immortal. A vast tapestry of lands and peoples, wars and kings, courage and folly. More than 2,000 years later, his voice still echoes. The voice of the first man who sought to understand not just what happened, but why. Every story from history carries a lesson, and every lesson brings you closer to mastering English. If you enjoyed today's journey through time, give this video a like, share it with your friends, and tell us in the comments what part of history you'd love to explore next. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a new story from Time Trackers, where language meets legacy.